we might just find ourselves sitting there and there is an inbox full of emails and to-do list here and calendar notifications and someone tapping me on the shoulder, and I actually don't know what to do next.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to episode 140. Yes, I do have another amazing guest to introduce you to in this episode. And he's traveled around the world and done a lot of amazing things, including entertaining the idea of being a photographer. He's an amazing storyteller. He's lived in multiple countries. Brad Hook is an author, speaker, creative technologist, and entrepreneur. He leads the Resilience Lab at the Resilience Institute, pioneering integrated approaches to human performance and well-being. He has loads of books, one that's just come out called Start with Values, which I think everyone needs to know about. Values really drive your decisions day to day in your business. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And he has some very unique and interesting takes on anxiety and stress and fulfillment, which I know you'll also want to hear. So, guys, shall we do this? You're going to love this chat. Let's welcome Brad onto the show. Brad, welcome to the Hustle Rebellion. I'm so happy you're here. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think we're so aligned, and I'm so happy to have this conversation with you and to get to know about your backstory soon as well. And we always start our show with some really amazing, tangible tips. And I'd love to know from you personally a few tips that you do during more overwhelming, stressful moments in your professional life or business. How do you get through those times?
So I spend a lot of time thinking about this and talking about this in workshops with organizations. So one of the keys is to tune into your physiological state. So I'm under pressure. I've got an ancient nervous system trying to deal with modern stressors. And quite naturally, my nervous system is going to say, okay, this is overwhelming. This is dangerous. Let's activate fight mode, perhaps, or flight mode, or maybe freeze mode. People often don't realize, but freeze mode manifests in our everyday life as procrastination.
Right.
We might just find ourselves sitting there and there is an inbox full of emails and to-do list here and calendar notifications and someone tapping me on the shoulder, and I actually don't know what to do next. And the safest thing to do is to sit there and scroll a feed because it gives me a little dopamine hit, or really just worry, future-based thinking, or ruminate, past-based thinking. I'm anywhere except for the present moment. So first and foremost is developing that self-awareness to even detect how am I responding or reacting to the challenge at hand. And then having some tools such as tactical calm, which is a very practical, simple breathing exercise. Okay. And when I run workshops, we hook someone up to a heart rate monitor. They're not quite sure what's going on when I ask for a volunteer. And then I get them up, hook them up to a heart rate monitor, and I ask their colleagues, what usually stresses Heather? And then you watch the heart rate go incredibly wild on screen, low coherence. It's all over the place, jagged lines. And then we use this exact technique to bring them to a state of coherence. And when you show people in real time, they go, okay, this is not just like fluffy woo-woo wellness stuff. This works. This just calmed my colleague down. And hey, we all feel better because we just practiced it. So breathing in for around about 3 seconds. You out there can join me if you wish. It's diaphragmatic breathing. Yogis and martial artists call it belly breathing. So what we're going to do is breathe in for 3 seconds. Feel the ribs widen. So 2, 3, pause. And then we're going to exhale for 5 seconds. So 2, 3, 4, 5. And we repeat. You're welcome to repeat a few times. What this does is it signals safety. It activates the vagus nerve, which is the same part of the body that's activated after a big meal. And we can actually calm our nervous system, slow down our heart rate. Every time we breathe in, the heart rate increases. Every time we exhale, it slows down. So through a deliberate practice like tactical calm, we can slow our heart rate. We can bring ourselves to a state of security or safety. We feel a bit more safe. We're not in that runaway state of the sympathetic nervous system. And suddenly we can open up our prefrontal cortex, the human part of the brain, and we're fully present once again. We're not in that primal fight, flight, freeze state. So that's one tip. I suppose there are many, many others that are important to me. Sometimes a micro break is all we need to
Yeah.
refocus. And we often don't give ourselves permission to take that little moment to disconnect from the noise, to change environment, to calm the nervous system, perhaps using a tool like the one I just shared, and to just create some space so that we can decide what we're going to do without overreacting or relying on our ancient nervous system in the modern context. And there's many, many more things, ranging from psychological flexibility, how do I view the situation, through to core values, which is something that I'm passionate about. How can I use one of my values as a lens through which I observe this challenge? Can I be kind? Can I be patient? Is there an opportunity for physical fitness? Maybe not in this situation, but I can probably be kind and maybe patient. So there's a few tips.
I absolutely love it. The whole conversation on values I find really interesting. I used to work for the speaker Tony Robbins,
Oh,
and
wow.
in my young 20s, when I did art, fashion, and music events, and I was in the States in San Diego, I mean, it was the furthest thing from my mind was understanding responsibility and personal development. And I remember that was the first lesson I learned that really stuck with me is sort of you live your life by your values. So I found it interesting that you said look through the lens of the values of, like, say, kindness, for example, which is a huge one of mine. Speak to me a little bit about values. How important do you think that they are for somebody's existence day to day?
I think they're critical. And sometimes we don't even know what our values are. We only
No.
realize that we're acting out of alignment with a value when we experience distress of some sort. So I became interested in values when I was sitting in a boardroom with a group, and one of the executives said, values are a bunch of junk. It's just woo woo, esoteric nonsense. You can't measure it with a heart rate monitor. So why even talk about it?
Right.
That got me thinking. You can actually measure values misalignment with the heart rate monitor. If you say to someone, oh, is exercise really important to you? Yes. What happens if you get injured? And you can watch what happens when they even think about values misalignment. We all have values, and often they're in the backdrop of our lives, but they're there. And they come into sharp focus in those moments of adversity or challenge and even opportunity. Now, why leave it to default? Navigating our way through this journey of life, not really knowing, having an inkling, but not being really clear about what matters, because
Mm,
clarity creates control. So
yeah.
what I set off on was an adventure of researching the science and practice of values. My forthcoming book is all about this topic. It's called Start with Values, and understanding how we can first discover our core values individually, then how we can activate them so that they're active in our lives. We can use
Mm,
them as lenses through which we view our challenges and opportunities. We can build habits, and I think this is critical. Imagine weaving a web of habits based on your values so that each and every day they're not just ideals or words on the About Us page of a website or vinyl stickers on a wall, but they're actually how we are living our life. So if I realize that I value kindness, physical fitness, and wealth, just let's say those three, then every day are my actions aligned with these values? Yes, I've got a morning routine. I go out in the sunshine, get some sun, go for a jog. Great. I take micro breaks. Now my value of physical fitness is going to be aligned with my behaviors. And am I being kind in my interactions? When I find myself experiencing a bit of resentment or frustration or hostility, hold on a second. Am I acting in alignment with what matters? Because a really good way of detecting if I'm not aligned with the value is the sense of regret. If I
yeah.
regret how I behaved, usually it's because that was out of alignment with what's important to you. And then finally, am I working on what matters most in order to align with that value of wealth accumulation or whatever it might be? Everyone's values are different. And that's the point of the book. Also recognizing that our values change. If anyone's ever had a child, you realize that you go from valuing all kinds of independent stuff to valuing stability and security much more than you did before, and so forth. So I think it's a journey of life. I think it can be a lot of fun, and we can really shift the people's mindset around what values are and how they can be leveraged as really powerful tools for a meaningful life. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about recently.
I love it. No doubt that you have your book coming out as well. And when is your book out again?
It's out on the 26th of November. So at this
Okay.
point in time in early September, I am working on marketing and podcasts and yeah, really just spreading the word in advance of that. But it's been quite a long journey and a fulfilling one at that. And actually in the book, I talk about the values pyramid, at the top of which is fulfillment. And I can talk more about fulfillment, why that's important later on.
Yeah. Yeah, we will talk about fulfillment for sure. And what's perfect timing, because by the time this podcast is out and you guys are listening to this, you'll be able to buy his book. Just literally would have launched. So this is perfect timing. And I mean, I can't stress the importance of when I learned and understood values, how the impact it made in my life. So I urge you guys to dive into this topic deeper. And I want to know more about your journey. Speaking of life being an incredible journey, because you mentioned that briefly before. Brad, you've lived in a lot of places, you've done a lot of amazing things. So tell us a little bit about your journey to what you're doing right now.
So the short version is I grew up in South Africa. I was always fascinated with storytelling. I studied media and photography. I thought I'd become a photojournalist. So I set off out into the world. I landed in London, which was one of the few places a young South African could get a visa. So I got a holiday visa and quickly realized that photojournalism was going to be a bit of a challenge at the age I was and with the experience I had. So I took a diversion and worked in the corporate world. I thought, let me understand what business is all about. So I went and worked in big telecommunications companies, and I saw these gaps everywhere. I saw that there were these new technologies emerging, like the internet, giving away my age now. But yeah, and I thought, well, the internet is fascinating. How can I
Yeah.
get initially I thought, how can I get access to it? Because only a few lucky people had access on their computers. I thought, what if I learn how to make websites? So I taught myself coding, which was not
Mm,
intuitively, I wasn't great at maths, for example, at school. I was much better in arts and biology and so forth. But I found it really quite easy. Started building amazing platforms, navigated my way through these archaic corporations, and then decided I had enough, moved to Australia. And
mm,
that was amazing. I started a digital agency and it was a perfect time for it, just during the dot-com bust, but it bounced back. And I started making websites and apps and digital experiences for a range of large organizations across Australia, from major banks to universities. And always what made it unique for me was I was helping them to tell their story more effectively. It was always the storytelling approach that I brought to the table. Yeah, sure, I had a team who could code and designers and all of that, but I was really so focused on that brand voice and telling the
yeah.
story effectively. And I think this is true for you as well. I see the work that you do, and you do it very well. So I was fascinated about all of this, but then I got caught up in the hustle, in the grind set, and I had a major burnout. I still didn't know at that point in time that performance requires care, that you need to
Mm,
recover, that you can't party hard all weekend and work all night all week and think that this is sustainable. So you don't realize it when you're in the thick of it. That's one of the issues with experiencing burnout. It's just you start to lose hope. And eventually you find yourself at the bottom of the spiral. A really strong indicator of burnout is this sensation of anhedonia. So hedonism is just the pursuit of joy. Anhedonia is a complete lack of joy. Nothing gives you joy anymore.
yeah.
And I was there. So I sold everything, bought a one-way ticket, went to India, and decided to pursue my dream of photojournalism. Now, I was fortunate in that I had clients who were willing to pay me. So I did the whole Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week, literally. I was working about 4 hours per week, and the rest of the time exploring, interviewing people, writing for magazines. And it was a fantastic experience. I ended up interviewing lots of people who I still talk about today. They're core to many of my teachings and workshops. And then traveled to many, many countries doing this, went to Vietnam, interviewed Kung Fu masters, interviewed monks in
My
Nepal,
goodness.
went all over the place. And it was, yeah, such a fulfilling and rewarding experience. Although it's not to say it was without its ups and downs. Parasites in the Himalayas, and
Oh,
running out of money in Bangladesh, and going surfing in the Baltic Sea in a giant storm, like amazing things. But I would never take it back. And I did it much later in life. Most people do their big travel experience in the early 20s. This was me in my early to mid 30s.
yep.
And then I met my future partner. We ended up moving to New Zealand, joined the Resilience Institute, which was a perfect match because along the way I'd built platforms that help people elevate their well-being with some of Australia's leading experts in this area. We built probably the first well-being platform for the workplace back in 2001.
Okay.
And it was used by many of the biggest companies, a huge success. And that really sparked my thinking around positive psychology, neuroscience, preventative medicine, all of these fields
Yeah.
that can uplift our experience of work and life. So when I joined the Resilience Institute, I saw it as an amazing opportunity to scale this approach. It was primarily driven by workshops, but I saw there was a real need to scale the approach beyond just the executive team of a company. So built a platform that could measure resilience individually and at scale. Resilience being the learned ability to develop and cultivate physical, emotional, mental, and social fitness. And I've been on a journey ever since, running workshops all around the world, probably thousands of webinars and workshops, building platforms used by hundreds of thousands of people, and yeah, loving the
That,
journey, but still always paying close attention to my tendency to be a workaholic, to not create boundaries, and to not be an imposter who talks about this stuff and doesn't practice it. I think if you're really going to talk about this stuff, you need to walk the talk. And so that's a journey that I'm always on.
I'm on the same journey. I really value how you spoke about burnout because I remember that time in my life when I had it. And you're right, there was no joy. And that was it's like a hopeless, joyless moment of my life. And I think that was incredibly well articulated, that
Thank you.
moment that some people go through. I want to know a little bit about how you specifically work with people because I know you have your books and you have your amazing podcasts and your workshops. So if somebody today were to work with you, what does that look like?
Great question. So I work in a few different capacities. There's the Resilience Institute, and then there's the Values Program, which is slightly different. The Resilience Institute program is so well established, and we've run it with many companies across the world. Some of my actual clients are PwC, Electronic Arts, Saskatchewan Health Authority, a big health authority in Canada, and many, many more. Bridgestone, you name it. I've worked with many, many
Wow.
companies. So usually there's a need, a kind of use case. For some companies, they're experiencing high levels of burnout, or there is some kind of disruption going on, and they just want to make sure people have some skills to handle the disruption or to build better rhythms in their work and life so that they're not burnt out, so that they can start to bounce forward rather than back.
Okay.
And or it's a team looking to elevate their performance, and they're saying, okay, how do we get ourselves into that flow state? We want to be a high performing team, and that's my favorite kind of work to do. So they engage with us. Usually we provide each person with the resilience assessment so that each individual gets a sense of their own strengths and risks. Powerful tool. It measures 50 factors that contribute to the human experience. And then we look at the score as a group, and there's always fascinating insights there because often a team will be saying, we're burnt out, or
Mm,
people are finding it really difficult to focus because of the intensity. And
yeah.
then we deconstruct the results, and you'll find things like no one's sleeping very well, or extremely high levels of hypervigilance. So everyone's on their device in that last hour before bed. And I often say, I've never received an email at 11 p.m. that sent me into a wonderful night's sleep. I don't know if you have. Yet, why do we
No.
do it? Why do we feel that temptation just to check one more time? So there's habits like this that can really help. So once we've got a clear picture of the strengths and risks, then I'll run a program. And the program
Okay.
incorporates 4 elements: bounce, which is our capacity to navigate challenge and change and adversity, remembering that 77% of the time humans naturally grow stronger as a result of adversity. It's called post-traumatic growth, but it's just helping to expedite that process so we don't linger on a downward spiral for longer than is necessary. Then we look at
Okay.
growth. What are some habits, skills, tools to increase your vitality and your cognitive resource? And it's often the simplest things. It's like sleep hygiene, it's daily movement, a morning routine. And these are the simplest things to tweak. And they have a huge ripple effect for individuals, teams, families, for everyone. And then the third component is connection. As you know, our emotional intelligence is foundational for leadership. How can we deliberately practice empathy, practice emotional literacy, and build those strong connections that help us to navigate the world? And then finally, flow state. How can we create
Okay.
our high performance zone deliberately? And for leaders, it's transformative because they say, instead of just life by default, let's create a workplace culture by design. Let's create some rhythms that enable both performance and care. And that's what that program is all about. The other program, the values program, I help companies recreate their values collaboratively. So instead of it just being a consultant or the marketing team who says our values are bold, innovation, whatever, those are just ideals, right? Um, we actually find out what's most important to the group and activate them as habits and behaviors within that organization, which is the most reliable way to change culture that I've ever encountered.
Oh my goodness, what a journey and the amazing work that you're doing. And we'll find out in coming up shortly how to actually work with you and get access to you. But I do want to not let go of an idea, and that was the word fulfillment, which you
Yes.
briefly touched on before.
Mm.
Because you talked this idea of flow state for me is a big theme in my life right now, and people keep saying that word, or whether that's my reticular activating system picking up on it because I'm looking for it. Who
Yes.
knows? But flow state and fulfillment. I want to get your thoughts on fulfillment because I feel like you're either sort of running away from anxiety and stress and overwhelm, or you're seeking happiness and fulfillment. What do you think fulfillment actually is?
It's a great question. So, if you don't mind, I'll step back to why fulfillment is important to me,
Please.
which is last year at the Resilience Institute, we ran a study. We do this every few years to look at what are the factors or skills or competencies supporting the most resilient people. And in the past, it was always about, it was very active. It was focus. It was bounce, deal with adversity, get your way through. But it's starting to change, and you're really seeing these care factors creeping in as being some of the most important. And last year, fulfillment was at number one. So the most resilient people, the highest performers, are practicing fulfillment. And that got me thinking. So
Huh.
what does fulfillment actually look like? First and foremost, when you're stuck in the grind set or the hustle and you're not creating space for reflection, you will never experience fulfillment. You don't get fulfillment by default. It happens in pockets of space, and it can sometimes happen by chance. I go for a run, get to the top of the hill, and there's a beautiful sunset, and I stop for a moment and just go, maybe take my headphones out because I'm listening to podcasts, and go, whoa, this journey is worthwhile. This is amazing. And that's so good for your well-being. That increases your resilience dramatically. So I actually even often start workshops with that question. What are you most proud of from the past year? And people talk about it. And then you ask them, how are you feeling right now? And they all feel great. And that's because we've just created a little bit of space for deliberate reflection. And that's how fulfillment can emerge. Another great tool for teams is to just ask, we call it the WWW exercise, ask what went well, just to offset our negativity bias, because we're always on high alert
Okay.
for potential threats in our environment. It's a survival technique that's helped our ancestors for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, but just stopping every now and then and going, what are all the good things that have been going on? So I was fascinated to find that fulfillment, which I think is almost an outcome of being a resilient person, ranked so high. And then this got
Yeah.
me thinking about, well, how do we get more fulfillment? And as part of my values approach, I believe that values aligned action is really important, because if I'm acting with kindness, if I'm accumulating wealth, if that's one of my values, if I'm managing to stay physically fit, you find meaning in what you're doing. But then you do need to create that little pocket of space from time to time for introspection or reflection, or just to ask yourself what went well, and maybe write it down, the 3 blessings exercise or a gratitude journal. And this is how fulfillment starts to emerge.
This is fascinating, literally, and I'm not kidding. Just probably 30 minutes ago, I started a team connection channel in my Slack, because that's how I work with my team a lot of times. And it is a what went well during the week check-in.
Love it. Love it so much.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting you say that. That really backs up that sort of intuition that I created that channel for. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, wow. Okay, so I'd like to know next a little bit about what makes you extraordinary with what you're currently doing in your field.
Hmm. I think that I am good at. It took me a long time to be able to say this because of the
Yeah.
old, self-doubt and limiting beliefs and all that kind of stuff that we all have. But what I do well is take concepts that can be quite dense scientific research and convert it into practical tools that everyone can use, that you can take home and share with the 6-year-old. That's my objective. And weaving in storytelling, because that's always been fundamental to who I am.
Yeah.
Ever since my grandfather used to sit with me in bed when I was 5 years old, and we would write stories about knights and princes and such, storytelling has been a way for me to express my thoughts and emotions, and being able to weave in real stories of the people that I've met, whether it's a kung fu master in Vietnam or Bangladesh's only surfer, or business people, or whoever it is, people who've been in other workshops who've made magnificent changes in their lives. It gets me into this deep flow state because I'm weaving together everything that I'm interested in. It's the storytelling, the science, and then of course just injecting a little bit of philosophy,
Yeah.
because there's wisdom that's been around. If you look at Stoicism, for example, it's basically the grandfather or grandmother of cognitive behavioral therapy. So these things that people have been talking about for thousands of years, and bringing them into the modern context and saying, hey, let's zoom out a little bit. Humans have been dealing with lots of adversity for a long time, and there are lots of tools that can help us on this journey. And how can I help others elevate their consciousness so that they can enjoy this experience of life? It's just a glimpse in eternity. And I think we spend way too much of our energy fighting with each other over silly things when we could be just making the most of this magnificent opportunity that we've got.
And I would add to your gifts, you're an incredible communicator, and that comes with your storytelling. But the way you're describing different modalities and tying things together in a way that people can understand is quite amazing to listen to. So
Thank you.
genuinely.
I'm much less experienced being on this side of a podcast, so it's quite a different experience for me. So thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, I don't want to lose track of your two podcasts too. Before I move on to the last couple of questions, what are
Okay.
your two podcasts called?
Yeah, so there's the Resilience podcast. I started it during COVID times, and it was a way to just stay connected to people around the world. It gained a life of its own, and we've eventually had guests like Tal Ben Shahar, who's he ran the largest class in Harvard University history on happiness, and amazing people. And that's been just such a huge growth and learning experience for me. And then about 8 months ago, I started the Brad Hook podcast, and it's quickly grown to actually eclipse the Resilience podcast, which is really interesting. I didn't expect
Wow.
that. And it's primarily, I suppose, because I've got a bit more scope to speak about anything. Whereas resilience, we focus on academic perspectives, on how to be the best version of you, usually in the workplace context. Whereas the Brad Hook podcast, I get the opportunity to talk about all kinds of things that I'm just curious about. So yeah, 2 channels. I try and record maybe 2 or 3 sessions a week. Now I'm at a point, I'm sure you're there as well, where there are way too many guests trying to get on than I have time.
Yeah.
So uh, there's a question. What if I just shifted to do that and really tried to monetize the podcast? But for now, it's just really a great way to meet amazing people. I've met some of my best friends actually through podcasting, and it's changed my life. Yeah, I love it.
I'm mutual. That's why I do this too. So yeah, and I've met you, which is great. So
100%. Yeah.
amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the future of what you do. I mean, we could go for the future of resilience and performance, or perhaps what you want to talk on. But what's the future of Brad look like?
It's a great question. So I am committed to resilience. I head up the Resilience Lab where we do research. We build tools such as the resilience assessment. We create content designed to help people improve their experience of work and life. I really enjoy it, even though there are always challenges with a growing business, team members shifting from being kind of an expert in content and technology to now leading a team. That's a big change, of course. I do see values playing a really important role, and I'm sure at some point there'll be opportunities to share the word, whether through big TED Talks or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
share the methodology and share it at scale, because I really believe in that at the world at the moment could use with people discovering their values and really trying to live them, not other people's values or values prescribed by convenience or social media, junk values as they're called, like really connecting with what's important to you, living that, and then respecting each other's values. Because right now we're in this time of great polarization. And in fact, if you take 2 people, it doesn't matter which end of, say, the political spectrum they're on, and you bring them together, most of the time there are common values there. And the
Mm.
political beliefs are quite different to what you actually value. And beliefs can and should change over the course of our lives, whereas values tend to be more consistent. They're North Stars that accompany us on the journey. So doing more of that work, it will be part of my future, and writing more books. I have a book on fulfillment that I'm working on, and my fiction, which has always been my number one love. So publishing my fiction novel, which I've been writing for 12 years.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
you with your timing of what you do, you're right. It couldn't be more needed, especially with the polarization. I'll call it an issue, because definitely I see that in the States, and every time I go back to see my family, I
Yeah.
am blown away of
Crazy.
what's happening over there.
Yeah.
But also you mentioned how you work with teams in high moments of stress, and AI. This is this upheaval and disruptor that's coming and freaking a lot of people out about their job stability and how they use it. So, what you're doing is amazing. And if people want to connect with you, where do they go to work with you or learn more about what you do?
Thank you for asking. So my website is bradleyhook.com, BradleyHook.com. All of my links are on there. If you're on Instagram, I'm quite active. I post clips from my podcast conversations. So it's just Brad Hook on Instagram. LinkedIn, just search Bradley Hook. You'll find me. If you're interested in the book, Start With Values, just go to startwithvalues.com and you'll find all of the links there. I think that's the best ways to get in touch with me. If you're interested in a resilience workshop, just search up Resilience Institute and my team will connect you with me.
Love it. As we start to wrap up, is there any last words of advice or wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners, as you know that they're going through moments of perhaps overwhelm, self doubt, and confusion in their business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think stay curious. Curiosity shifts us out of fight, flight, freeze mode. And I've heard Sir David Attenborough say in a documentary, it is through play that the lion cubs develop agility. When last did you play? When last did you and your team have some time to have a laugh? It's something I wrote about. I'll share a link to my column on Entrepreneur Magazine. But when last did you actually laugh together as a team? That is such a powerful bonding process. It releases oxytocin. You feel connected. You feel safe. So stay curious, be playful. And there's a wonderful word that I learned through podcasting, which is confelicity. And it means delighting in someone else's joy. And it's beyond empathy. It's actually just really being so happy that someone else has succeeded in some way. See if you can do that for someone this week.
Oh, what a beautiful way to end our conversation. Thank you so much for being here and sharing so much of yourself and your story with our listeners.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you all for tuning in.